Here we go. Hey, what's up? I think most people are familiar with Phantomite by now. My one of my favorite CSM members for sure.
Yes.
Britt's gonna kill me if I say you're my favorite, but kind of my favorite.
That's all I need. I can quit now. Don't even bother. All I was here for.
So most people are pretty familiar with Phantomite,
So
but then also we have a Captator on today, who is the main FC for
Logi. I do Logi, but I don't do main.
Yeah, but an old FC has been around for a long time for Dead Terrorists, and I believe Dead Terrorists, it's like a group. I don't know exactly. Like I've seen them every now and then everywhere, even in HiSec, right? But what exactly does Dead Terrorist do? I don't know if I can put you guys in like one distinct box. Could you explain what Dead Terrorists do?
So we've done a lot of things over the time we've been around. I think Dead Terrorists was founded around 2009. So we were in LowSec for quite a while. So people might, from sort of early 2010s, know us around Hagilur. And then we were out in Null for a bit. We got paid a solid amount of ISK to go and fight on someone's behalf. I wasn't playing at this point, so I'm sort of talking about history I wasn't present for. And that kind of went interesting. And then the kind of the general consensus was that was not our thing. Being in Null and owning Sov and etc. was not really our bag. And then more recently, I'm going to kind of skip over a few things. We've been in wormhole space. So we were in a C3 wormhole with a nullsec static for all of 2018 and 2019 and most of this year. And we just moved over to a C2 wormhole with a nullsec and a C5 static. And most of what we do is we crank the handle, we roll our nullsec wormhole, and we try and fight things in null. So we often tackle Rorquals or Capitals to try and either get a nice frag, then hopefully some dank loot, or a fightable response. And sometimes that response is 40 super carriers, and it's not very fightable. And sometimes that response is 150 harpies. That's the last time we were in Delve. And that also isn't very fightable. But sometimes we get a sort of a small capital fleet, or we get a sort of a medium size sub-capital fleet, or some combination of the two that we can have a fight. And hopefully we're bringing as much content as we're receiving to nullsec space. The HiSec stuff was basically we got roped into a war against Pirat, as was by some friends, and ended up having a few fairly bloody brawls. There's a fairly long 3-part AAR on Reddit that you can find if you search for my name. My user is the same as my game name. Found a few interesting holes in the war deck system that some of which might have been fixed since. But yeah, that was very much a side project. Most of what we do.
Were you looking for those holes?
No, we were. They were used against us. So we highlighted them.
Yeah, that's when I think it was you I was talking to at the time. I'm pretty sure, right?
Yeah, that was when we'd pushed the Pirat War HQ Astrahus into Hull, and then we picked up a war deck from Test and a war deck from Pandemic Horde. And I don't know if you're intimately familiar with how many characters the Terrorist has in its alliance, but it's
Not
several orders of magnitude smaller than Test and Horde. So we used a trick that had been used against us earlier in the war. So we on the right before the timer, we all dropped Corp and joined another corporation that was also at war with Pirat from the same war HQ. And so Test and Horde were left rather ineffective on the grid, unable to shoot anyone while we closed things out.
Yeah.
But we enlisted your help to try and bloody Pirat's nose.
Yeah, I remember, like, usually people convo, like I get convos all the time about, like, hey, I got this and this opportunity, right? You can kill this super. Like, turns out he's in a pause saved up, whatever, right? Like,
I hate those mails. It's
Yeah.
always no, definitely you'll definitely get good kills here, and what they mean is
yeah.
I need you to come and blob these guys for me.
Exactly. So sometimes, like, and then over the years, you get kind of a feel for, like, okay, right, this guy, he knows what he's doing, so he knows he's not gonna waste your time, right? He's also looking into the future, saying, like, he doesn't want to be like, oh yeah, sorry, we just needed the blob to scare them off or whatever, right? So we never had contact before, I believe. Before that, maybe like on the side, something in local or whatever, right? But no, like, we never really talked before that. But I recognized your name, right? So when you said, like, hey, like, we've got this in high sec and stuff, like, and you guys are at war, and you guys are like one of the few people that could actually show up and help on this one, right? And it's against Pirat. I was like, maybe there is something to this, right? So we looked into that a little bit, and I was like, yeah, sure. If you find us a war model, you found us a war model right into the system. It was like,
Yeah,
now we have to show up, right? So yeah, we showed up and then, tipped the scale a little bit, I guess. But,
So
Last time, only about a month ago, somebody with massive covert overtones invited us and wanted to chat to us directly on voice on Discord in a strange Discord server, and it was about to be an amazing PvP opportunity. And he started with, like, he thought it was a bombshell. He's like, this alliance very often flies 20 jackdaws, and I know which region they're going to be NPC.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. You know what I also always get is, nowadays, is low sec raw cards. People sending me screenshots of, like, look at this, there's a lot of raw cards here. And I'm like, I know, it's hard to tackle them in low sec, first of all. Right? It's fucking, they're slippery, but they're even more slippery in low sec. And then, obviously, getting to low sec at the moment, it's like, there's so much shit going on, like, we barely have the chance to go, like, proper hunt, which kind of sucks. And to go for that one target, like, I don't do that anymore. I feel like to go for one target right now that you have on the list, the chances are that you just waste time, right? So we need several targets, and it's hard to line more targets up. So at the moment, I feel like, what is your experience right now during the war? Do you feel the same? There's a lot of targets missing.
Can I ask you something else about these Rorquals first? What sized low sec groups are you finding that are using Rorquals?
Well, the biggest sized, right? That's usually Snuff, right? Gotta say.
So the addition of valuable mining to low sec has merely given the largest groups some fresh opportunities to pull in money, which encourages the further embiggening of said groups, because they can bring in support, overwhelming support, and it's just a further encouragement to grow larger groups in low sec after it was added. GG.
That
Thanks,
is
CCP.
well, that is true. I totally agree. And it's kind of funny. There was a discussion actually on my Discord earlier today with the whole passive moon mining thing, right? It comes up every time you talk about it, right? And yeah, they need to look into it. Would be nice if they could look into it, and then if they decide against it, give us some input, like why, like what do you think is it
Yeah.
it's a bad idea and stuff. Like be a little bit more like, because I feel like the longer it stays like this, the harder it's gonna get to to have actually smaller groups in low six then.
There's been some really interesting chat on the CSM Discord as well recently about passive income sources. Murray Rothbardo keeps basically poking the hornet's nest about it. And I think one of the problems is that for a lot of the larger groups that have, well-organized logistical backbones and they have big industrial programs, etc., a lot of the guys who drive that and who kind of power the financial side of their alliances don't really understand why the smaller and the medium scale groups really struggle with it. So they see the I'm kind of paraphrasing, but there's kind of this expression, well, what you've done is you've taken an old POS mining system, which was ISK that goes into the alliance's wallet via selling the goo, and you've converted it into a system where that ISK goes into your members' wallets, and then the alliance still gets a tax cut off it. And they're sort of saying, well, isn't this a better system because you're enriching your members, and that's what gets them to feel chips and undock. And I mean, for my own take, I feel like it misses the point that certainly a lot of our guys and a lot of the guys in groups of a similar scale and inclination to ours don't have any interest in doing any mining ever. Like, mining is something to be fundamentally avoided at all cost, as frankly is most PvE. Most of us try and do the highest ISK per hour, shortest number of hours PvE we have available to us, be it SP or skills or like investment floor to get started in some of these things. And there's this real disconnect where it's like, no, the problem is all of these content, all of these income streams require PvE content of some nature, and that is the fundamental barrier, because we don't have people who want to do big industrial things, and they are the only other way that we would be able to carry the weight of SRP and ship replacement programs and schemes of a more kind of nuanced nature. Like, I remember there was a bit of a furore on Reddit when the initiative changed its SRP percentages slightly. Like a small medium group, you have SRP
we didn't
on
actually.
like,
I'm just saying. Right? Someone pinged it out because we talked about it. He misunderstood. He's like, "Oh, we're cutting it from like 80% to 50%." But we didn't.
Okay.
But
but like for us, we SRP Dictors, we SRP Tackle, we SRP Logi when we can, and we SRP like core hulls like links or any like recons that you need to make the doctrine function. We can't afford to SRP even on a percentage-wise line DPS. So it's just like there's this huge amount of structure and wealth availability, and obviously wealth begets more wealth, that's just taken for granted, not in a kind of intentional way. It's just like, if you haven't functioned in a small to medium group in a long time, you are not capable of understanding the realities of what this generation we have available to us on a group scale. We might still have independently wealthy members, but most of those income sources don't tend to be ones that can be scaled into making the alliance wealthy. That might be someone who has, for example, a high-class wormhole farm hole. So they are independently quite wealthy, but you can't just pull money out of them in any fair way to translate that to the alliance being able to fund things. I don't know, I'm kind of looping a bit here, but there is a real disconnect. And I think that's part of the problem in the entire dialogue around passive moons or any kind of money tree-like system. Until we succeed in bridging that understanding gap, I think it's kind of going to be screaming into the void.
Cap, what do you think? What do you think the biggest thing that players say against passive moon mining? What do you think is the players' biggest, loudest problem with it?
But one second before you do that, I wanna just point out that whenever I talk to Hai or Tao, and those are the the leaders of Snuff who are still the biggest low sec group. I mean, together with maybe now, what's his name is catching up, Rocket X and so on, right? Are they low sec group? Are they a no sec group? I don't know, but they have influence in low sec. So Wrecking Crew, right? So they're a big group too. But Hai and Tao, whenever I talk to them, they are both not happy with the active moon mining. So they have been very outspoken and said like this is missing in low sec, and so I don't know.
It's simpler than that as well. There is nothing worth taking in low sec that you then want to defend because you want to keep it.
Well, I mean, there's no kind of wealth generation system that requires solely a combat-oriented defense over any kind of consistent player activity with it in a PvE situation.
Something that often boils down to is that people, somebody will say, "Oh, well, why should PvP be an indirect generator of income?" And if you boil these people down, it's like, how dare you make money from having fun?
I mean, but the thing is that the precedent for having money trees exists with the Citadel-based market hubs, right? So the Tranquility Trading Tower is them often talked about like big, absurdity for the null blocks because it's the mechanics around it are so problematic that none of them want to fight for it. They just want to share it because that's the easiest way of dealing with it.
Well, I've got to be fair to them here. I've got to interject and say that I've spoken to I believe all the parties who previously briefly warred over having the trade hub in perimeter, and it's that in high sec where the optimal ship is just to stack
it's not interesting. It's not interesting, and
boring, soul destroying. It takes hours of doing a type of PvP that isn't interesting and is just soul crushing.
Well, I mean, you've turned PvP into an almost PvE experience, haven't you?
Yeah, it's just a chore.
In terms of how solved it is, and that's kind of one of the fundamental problems with a lot of PvE, and it's certainly a problem I know a lot of people who are minded like myself about PvE have with it, that it is so solvable. Like you find a solution and you just mindlessly execute it over and over and over and over and over again. And
wishy-washiness of CCP, the sort of nervousness and the staring at their feet as they shuffle around when you say something as simple and obvious to every single player. If you say something obvious like you should never have allowed keep stars to be anchored in high sec, they'll just be sort of quiet, they'll skip over it and they'll move on. Why don't they just do it? Just do it. And if they say, oh, well, we can't because there's already one there, well, set a 1-year unanchoring timer for it and be done with it.
I agree a lot. The same goes for general limitation of citadels in every system, I believe. No system should have an unlimited amount of citadels. And then the same argument is going to come up, right? There's already citadels there now, and how are attackers going to be coming in?
That's well, you can give bad justification for not fixing the problem. Oh, well, they're already there. What a terrible justification for fixing the problem.
There's a really simple solution to this. Once you have a solid like pop cap system of whatever nature, I think population cap on a constellation level rather than a system or a region level is more interesting because it allows you to fortify good economic systems or good chokes. And I think having a separate population cap for the 3 kinds of citadels is also interesting because then you can have, you can focus your building and your resource gathering and your kind of more defensive fortification-like structures in different areas. But what you could do is you could just say, right, well, you have a grace period like we've had with the Citadel cores, which I think was a great idea. Like, I'm really pleased that they went with a grace period and a staged introduction. And you just say from whatever date they've chosen, every structure in this system will slowly bleed hull at a rate of some percentage over some time interval. So I don't know, 1% a day, probably faster than that. And once enough structures are unanchored that the population cap is not exceeded, they stop eroding and they repair.
Well,
So
yeah, so it sounds simple, but that also sounds like there's ways to exploit that, right?
the way to exploit that is you go, okay, I'm going to spam structures in my opponent's home to get their citadels to grind down. But what you've kind of done there is you've created a conflict, right? You've given a very concrete reason that someone wants to fight over all of these structures, because if they're kept up long enough and enough of them are kept there, it will erode all of your structures. And it's a more maybe it's a more interesting way of offensively using them, because you have to core them now, right? So there is now a bit more of a trade-off in just throwing them all down.
So I agree that there is a solution for all these little problems that would come up with a limitation of citadels, right? What the exact solution would it be that bleeding structure? I would just argue that's probably not the right approach, but maybe it is. I don't know. But I'm pretty sure there would be a solution if they would be looking for it. I think the problem starts with, are they looking for that solution? Because do they want to limit citadels, right?
But there's also sorry, Fan.
I got a bit of an insight here on CCP's original vision. It's from when some players at a fan fest asked them about the upcoming citadels, what they wanted space to look like with these structures, and CCP said, "Oh, we want there to be a huge city of citadels stretching as far as the eye can see." And I mean, that initial, even the vision, not the execution, that vision sounds horrifying. And I don't know why they didn't take the feedback from on that horrible thing. I don't know why they didn't take the feedback from that seriously, but I guess that's the story of how development works.
I thought they had the old Titan mindset when they introduced Titans. There's always going to be just a few of those. That's what I thought they were thinking, right? Like, there's going to be only like 5 Keepstars, right, in all of EVE, right? They're 300 bill. Who's gonna, put raw cards and the safety of mining and all that stuff into account, and then you end up with the situation, right? But yeah, I mean, I don't know. The Citadel stuff in general, when they first introduced them, they had so many flaws. Everyone could tell it was a rushed kind of thing, concept wise, right? Yeah. Very well.
I think one of the things that I think is really difficult for CCP with Citadels, and I think, while there are lots of clear flaws in a lot of some of the implementations of various aspects of EVE, some of the problems that make these things not work are actually really hard. And I think one of the problems with there were two big problems with Citadels. One where they took a very different approach to POS, and one that I think is just a problem that's become more of a problem as the game has aged. So, but you've got groups that are of the scale of 10 to 20 people, and you are trying to provide a Citadel that works for a group of that scale. So they have like an Astrahus, or they have a Raitaru, or they have an Athanor, and that's like, okay, fine. At that scale, those structures work and everything's groovy. And then you start going up the scale of organizations, and let's just go all the way to the other end, and you've got a group that has tens of thousands of players, and they have multiple Keepstars all over the place, and then they have all of the other structures in untold numbers, because at that level they are just we can throw them kind of down wherever we want. And so how do you balance Citadels for a group of 10 to 20 people and groups of thousands of people.
I mean, they shouldn't
That's
be.
hard.
They shouldn't get. They shouldn't get better at their jobs the bigger they get. They should. I mean, they shouldn't offer better efficiency in construction and things as they get bigger, because that is just a straight calculation that the bigger your group, the bigger your citadels, and the better you can do. So sucks to be you, small guys. You can't compete economically in any way with your small citadels.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Maybe it should be the smaller the citadel, the better they can do
Which
the
I know
job.
doesn't make sense from but in real life perspective, but this is a video game.
Yeah,
Well-
like game balance wise, but like they should be better the smaller they are. But also, obviously, smaller citadels have way less safety to them, right? So you're
More
always
vulnerable, less
that
hit
safety
points,
aspect
less
is a big
defenses.
thing.
I mean, whether they should have defenses in the first place is another.
But it's so easy to
we
pause
won't go
them.
into at the moment.
Like it's so easy to pause like a Raitaru, right? Like you can do that solo. So
I think one of the levers that CCP has at their disposal but doesn't make enough use of is using. Oh, and then maybe they're coming back to it more because they are trying to regionalize resources. But you could have a setup such that you want to anchor a Tatara or an Athanor in the vicinity of a certain type of planet, or in the vicinity of a certain type of geographical effect that is local to a particular aspect, a particular constellation in a region, that makes it as strong as they are currently, and then by default they're not as strong. So you can create a system where, yes, you might be able to do really well with one of these structures or two of these structures, but you can't then do 10 times as well with 10 times as many. So basically, you kind of cut off the scaling. I think it's not fair to say you've put all of this time and this effort into getting this painful to build, painful to haul thing in place. It doesn't work as well. But I think what you could do is you could say, proportional to its price, it doesn't give you as much more, because that's always kind of been the problem, right? That power and ISK are supposed to scale. So power is supposed to scale less and less and less the more and more ISK you put in, and and it put ISK as a straight line. And broadly it does, but there are certain breakpoints where I suddenly have so many Titans you can't fight me. Is the obvious like combat one. I suddenly have so many keep stars that, or suddenly I have a keep star, and then you have to be this high to be able to attack me. Particularly if if you're in null and you can use caps. Like wormhole space, a Fortizar is easier to defend than a keep star, because you can't. The grid is just too big. It's unworkably big at the player scale of a wormhole group. So yeah.
If we had limitations on locations, you could put citadels. If there was a choke to stopping you from sticking up a keep star in every single system, then we wouldn't need to wring our hands and worry about asset safety making destroying people's citadels pointless. Asset safety would be completely fine and without problem if we could deny them the home. I think denying somebody entire people their individual assets is a stupid idea, but I think denying them the home is the key thing, which is impossible with citadels because here's a grid with 100 on it.
hey, thanks for the host, Payless. Welcome, guys. Talking about citadels. That's not even on my list, by the way, guys.
you can't defang them either. I think that's one of the problems. I know a lot of smaller to medium groups in that live in null have. Like I mean, we have it too, but for us it's less of a constant problem. You warp onto a citadel grid, like even if you tackle a Rork and an Athanor, you've suddenly got, if it's well fit, that it just knocks out X number of Logi, and that's just right. Okay, well, we came to the grid with 8 Logi, we now only have 4, and thus we cannot hold any reasonable time if we have a comparable sized subfleet come, which should be a good fight, but we just have to bail because all of our Logis are out of action because of the newts and the jams. And that, I think, would be much more palatable if I could disable. I could do some prep work, and I could say, okay, right, we're going to fight on this grid with this rock. While these guys are panicking it, go and start chewing on the Athanor and take its heavy newts offline.
I think the key thing about the defenses on citadels is, back when I were just a small boy, you used people in ships in space to defend your structures, not the structure.
Well, you did use the structure to a degree, though. Like
Not
dig
anywhere
stars, remember
near
those
as
ones?
impressively as we do.
Oh, come on.
Now.
Like big jam towers, or like the insane
Hey, at least you could drop
EHP.
capitals on them. At least you could drop capitals on
I
them.
do agree. And that's what we are missing too. Like, so when it comes to citadels, and then passive moon mining and all that stuff, I would just say, like, the citadels we have, they should be a little bit more different, a little bit more diverse in general, right? Like, why do we have 3 timers on an Athanor? Like, I don't get it. Why isn't it just one strong timer like Posses were? And no damage cap.
So much better at summing things up has come up with a good explanation of the problem of citadels. Is citadels were not designed to replace Posses or replace outposts. They were designed to replace both. And so they have obviously gained the capabilities of both, which makes them incredibly unbalanced. They intend people to use citadels as somewhere to live, but they wouldn't want people's places to live to be easy to take away. But these citadels perform all these different roles of production, various industry, refineries, a place to live, and also a defensive center, all at the same time. And I think that this could easily have been avoided by just CCP admitting to themselves that they should keep those things separate, and made an Upwell outpost and an Upwell pos shield, and keeping the two things separate.
It would have been easier to replace both and keep the balance more intact, but I don't think, yes, that's exactly what I said, basically, right? So, but you could still call it both at Citadel, right? It's not like they would have had
Upwell Citadel, Upwell force field, easy, done.
Yeah, like, I don't know. I agree. Like, it should fill different roles and then be significantly different too. Not just in like what's the damage cap and what's the armament, right?
Tethering exists so that people who can't afford a keep star can still use capital ships.
Yeah, I'm not even sure tether is a big problem. I used to hate tether. Really.
Without tether, how would you use a Titan as a group without a keep star?
Yeah, no, obviously tether. Tether has to be there right now, right?
The tether has to be there. Yeah.
Otherwise, you can only move Titans at downtime. Posses are still alive.
How
do we do this back then?
Very much to see. We have lost almost entirely. We've lost hunting traveling supers. That's gone.
Well, I would invite what's his name, Radist on from LSH, but he's not comfortable speaking English, and like I don't understand Russian. But yeah, he could fucking sing a song about that one, because when citadels were not a thing and people used to travel through Iridia, 90% of people traveling through Iridia died, right? And back then, a super kill was a highlight, right? People would make a Reddit post about that super kill, like, holy shit, a super died. So and they would kill supers all the time.
This kind of brings us to another point that I wanted to make about citadels, and I realize we're kind of spending ages on citadels, which is like maybe not all of what we want to talk about. The one of the things that would be really nice about a population cap system of some kind is that you wouldn't necessarily find a citadel in every single system in Null. Because back when I was roaming around in 2007, 2008, you had systems that did not have stations in them, did not have any safe point that a ratter or a miner could flee to without taking a gate. And so one of the things you had as an option as a hunter is you could put tackle on gates when you knew there was something in the system, and you could try and then hunt them within the system. Now, yes, this might not be the most fun for said PvE player, although there were means at their disposal at the time, at least, to avoid that hunting, but the ability to effectively set up a meaningful gate camp in someone else's space rather than in a low sec pipe or in your own space has massively diminished with the fact that there's a citadel in every system, and so there is always a safe point in every single system. There is a safe point, and to my mind, that's one of the things that has most changed in terms of how safe null is, that there is that safe point in every system, rather than when I remember doing belt ratting in Syndicate and Outer Ring in 2007 or so, and we'd have our standing fleet, and we'd have, because at that point very few people had alts, you'd have one person in rotation who would be on the kind of the like deep into the entrance, because you might have 3 jumps to burn till you can get to a station. So you had to know with good warning, oh, there are people coming. So you could then go, okay, I'll clear up the asteroid belt that I'm in, for example, or just leave it, and have to make your way back. And you didn't have hyper rigs, and you didn't have rigs, period. So getting yourself in, say, a ratting Raven back to safety could be a 10 to 15 minute task. All the while you've got the there are 4 people in local, one of them's in an interceptor, one of them's in a you had all of that anticipation and that adrenaline, I guess, in trying to kind of get safe.
I do see your point, but I don't think I agree that would be necessarily a good thing right now, because like we already got some nerfs to PvE activities and stuff like this, and I'm not sure. I mean,
much at this point, yeah.
Yeah, at this point it would be way too much.
Yeah,
right?
I agree.
If it was a different Eve, like in 2007, it was way different, right? I think back then it might have worked. I don't think you could make it work even with like significant changes. I don't think you could make it work like that and have like a healthy balance between the PvE and the PvP approach, right?
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment, and that's, I feel like the low end income availability in EVE has been very consistent. It's kind of trended up slowly as things like incursions got introduced and exploration got introduced in the wormhole space, but it's kind of remained roughly the same. You get an expectation of somewhere between 10 to 50 mil an hour, depending on what you're doing exactly in terms of repeatable PvE and where you're doing it. But I think what's changed is the economic leverage that you have if you are the person doing, say, Ishtar ratting nowadays versus then, is that rich people now are very, very, very much richer than rich people were then in the majority. So you're kind of, what you can get for the time you're spending ratting has gone down, in terms of, not in terms of what you can actually buy, because obviously like battleships, etc., were very cheap with the mineral glut from all of the Rorquals, but the power of a battleship in today's EVE is significantly smaller than the power of a battleship in that a decade ago's EVE. So while what you can buy hasn't changed, what you can do with it has come, what power that gives you has come down a lot. So yeah, reward needs to come up if you want to increase risk. I guess I agree with that.
Yeah, you know what? That kind of brings me to the ESS changes, right? Because I mean, they changed those, and from the start I said like the ESS itself seems really good, well balanced. I was worried about the scram thing, right? You go in, you're scrammed, and I still believe people will adapt to that meta a little bit more. So far, I haven't seen it too much. But people will go in there with like kitey stuff, right? Long range nagas and stuff. Go
Lots
in, take range. Yes, I mean, you have seen like overprop has already been a thing, but it wasn't like on a big scale that it felt like people are exploiting it too much, right? But like 5 nagas that go in and just take range, what are you gonna do? You whoop in there? You're never gonna catch them. They're fucking 100 km. You can barely scratch them. Maybe they can warp anytime. So like I'm still a little bit worried about it, but it doesn't look like My concerns were too much. Like
I think it's going to take some more time to know for sure exactly what the deal is. I think that so far the ESS content has been really a good addition, and every edition can do with some iteration.
iteration
CCP,
is the key word.
whether we trust CCP to actually perform useful iteration or not is something else. But
Well,
I
they
think
just did though.
we'll know a little bit further. This ESS iteration.
Yeah. So I mean, so the
This
point
is
that I
barely
wrote
an
down.
iteration. This is a throwing away and a revamping of a feature. You can't.
No.
I do not count iteration if it takes 4 years to get it.
No,
Wait. What are you talking about? Wait.
the small patch where they changed
Yeah.
the delay on the
Okay.
payout,
All right. So
which
let's.
I think was a positive sign.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're talking about like the original ESS. I don't
Yeah.
even call that thing an ESS anymore, right? That was something else. That was just some structure anchored in a fucking NPC site.
Bullshit.
I'm talking about the slide. So for years they do something. Let's say they bring out Citadels and they're like, yeah, but like now we've got the system, we can iterate on this and let's see how it works out, right? But they always took too long, right? It always took too long. And on the ESS, it kind of felt the same, right? They had to get it right. And I think on the ESS itself, they did get it right. While on the risk bounty modifier, I think they overshot it a little bit in the PvP direction, right?
Yeah.
And this time they actually iterated, which is super nice to see, right? That they actually follow up on it and say like, oh yeah, we're watching the numbers, we're watching the development, and then if we feel like it went too far, we're gonna dial it back, and they did. And it was just so good to see, right? So good to see. So
Okay, fair enough. I'll give them that one.
There were quite a few voices on Praisebob, because obviously for the nullsec static guys, particularly when you're in an like if you're the off time zone members or when you're midweek and you don't have as many actives, ESS is quite an excellent content source for smaller scale wormhole stuff, because you pop out a null and you open up the agency and you can kind of see, one, you have an idea of recent activity because you can see how much has gone in, and two, you know where you might be able to provoke a fight because there's enough that it might be worth defending. So it's like it's a really nice way of empowering small scale content of that type. But one of the issues that was discussed was that 5 minutes is fine if there is already a response of some nature ready, and it's just a matter of them having to go a few jumps to get to you, and where a few jumps could mean a very long distance with Ansiblex in their current state. Maybe that's a different point. So just bumping that timer up a little bit just gives that extra bit of time where you might get something that's more engageable, like a kitchen sink form of the people who are nearby, rather than you get no response. Because really, yes, you want the ISK, but you kind of want the content, you want the fight more.
preferably you want both, right?
Yeah, exactly. But if you had to pick, I would always take a fun fight over 100 milliskin in an ESS. And so just that having that extra delay means that while you might still get the kind of like, particularly Frad have been pretty good at like nightmare hell dunking people in their ESSs, you might get something in between a bit more, which I think was a really good change, both in that it matched what I was hearing, and in that it's probably quite straightforward to find a metric to actually evaluate whether that change was a good one, to tune that time, because you can pull kills and you can look at player movement around an ESS that's been that's ticking down on the CCP side, and you can actually build quite a nice like data-driven proof of what the delay should be.
Yep, I 100% agree. And then also with the timing, like let's be honest, right? Like a lot of people, they film it out, they end up in a system that might be good, maybe next door. They go in there, they spool up on the ESS, and then maybe they have time to do it on a second one, and then the timer is take down. So I think 6.5 minutes. Maybe they could push it up to 7, maybe 7.5 if they wanted to, but I think 6.5 minutes might be just the sweet spot, right? Somewhere in those along those lines. And
Yeah.
so it's really good to see that they're actually iterating on it, right? And I hope this is not the okay, now we got it all right and now they leave it. Like no, keep an eye on it still, right? Like now we're all saying, yeah, it looks good, but nobody knows if it's actually good. And that's totally fine to not know. Like keep an eye on it, and if it fucks up, and if it doesn't work out quite as well, and you think it's better, like with a half a minute more, don't be afraid to fucking tweak it a bit more. It's not like you're like I always feel like sometimes they're afraid to admit that something was wrong, but it's not wrong. It's just not perfect, right? So like just keep on iterating and like make it perfect, right?
Well, but also kind of exactly as you were saying earlier, where the meta is still developing in terms of how people are going to handle the 75k scram bubble, etc.
Yep.
The perfect delay might be different at different points in time, and I think this is one of the other things. You recognize that right is a condition of the time and the place, not just a one-off evaluation.
100%. 100% right. The meta takes a long time to develop. People don't realize, yes, on day one, everyone knew that phantasms and nightmares are going to be strong because they have an AB bonus. But the exact way how to engage and who to engage, how, right? That plays a role too. Like you just said, Fraternity no does the nightmare stuff on a bigger scale. There's ways to deal with nightmares, right? So maybe someone adjusts on that thing, and then maybe they go away from nightmares and do whatever AB domies, whatever they choose, right?
Well, the thing about ships that are obviously gigantically comparatively overpowered in certain situations is it does actually create a sort of equilibrium eventually, where if you bring it, nobody will come and fight you, so people stop flying them as much. A bit like my experiences in the last over the last 4 years with Garmas in faction war space. You
Fucking
don't
Garmas.
see Garmas all over the place constantly in faction war
Because they're not
space
engageable.
because nobody will engage them. Everybody will just leave when there's a Garma coming, and so you don't see Garmas as much. It doesn't mean that they are balanced. It means that they're not as much of a problem because they're so powerful in a
Which
way.
is weird. Yeah, I agree.
So I think that's why I think that's going to be the easiest reason why the ESSs are not absolutely full of phantasms and nightmares. It's because people just won't.
Yeah.
I think there's an important point to make on the back of that, in that where generally medium and smaller scale engagements tend to be more about having the fight for the fight's sake. I think there's a very strong shift in emphasis on larger scale where it's about winning an objective. So I think that the logic of this is too powerful for me to get fights holds quite well when you're solo or when you're in a small scale, but when you go up to like initiative size and larger, I think the priority starts becoming more about, do I win with this? And so the concern I would have in allowing something that is very, very much stronger in context to persist is that we are talking about a system that is in null, where a lot of the mindset is about objectives and winning objectives. And I'm not saying there's anything inherently wrong with that, but when your goal is to win an objective, you take the best tool for the job. And so you can kind of, when you shove that logic into a smaller context, you can deny yourself and other people fun by applying that logic. You want to if you want to win, you turn up in X. If you want to have an engageable fight, you turn up in Y. But as your scale and how much you've got it shifts, which one of those you prefer, I think migrates quite a lot.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't feel that it's just that people won't fight it is justification to allow something to remain overpowered in certain situations. But yeah.
Yep. So since we all agree that the ESS is one of the best things CCP has done in a while, I believe that at least.
Yep.
They're also doing
Also-
some other stuff, right? And that's something that Phantomite is pretty passionate about, I would say, right? It's the CCP like SP selling part.
I'm not particularly passionate about it, but I have been thinking about it a lot recently, especially since CCP currently has what I believe to not be a special limited period pack for sale, where you can just straight up just buy SP made out of thin air. They got that at the moment. Was it 1.5 million?
I don't even know about the numbers.
It's
I just know it
I
is a
think
thing.
it's a 1.5 million SP pack, but it also comes with a cerebral accelerator as well. And in British pounds, it's something like 33 or 34 pounds. So it doesn't compare favorably to just subscribing and training. It's SP generated out of thin air, straight up for sale from CCP. And I
But
think that there's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction when with the subject of just selling skill points, and I think that knee-jerk reaction is that it is the absolute worst thing that could possibly happen.
so isn't it part of a package that you can only purchase once per account?
Let's look it up.
So that's how I understood it. That's why I never talked about it. I don't have a problem with it. If it is like I'm saying, it's like you get a package as a new player or whatever, right? For like whatever, £33, and you get like a certain set of SP, but that's it. You can't just keep buying SP, right? So like if it was like you described, you just put money in the machine, you get SP for as long as you want, then I think there would be a massive issue there. But I don't think that's actually what's happening, right?
Let's sort of just dig deeper in that. What's the issue that would cause?
If you would get like endless amount
If
of SP,
it was money, you give money, you get SP straight away with no.
I don't know, to be honest. I haven't thought about it all that much, right? Technically, you could make the argument you could, in a complicated way, set it up so you could have the same thing, right? So you could put up a skill farm and then extract and
I
then
mean,
get that for real money.
essentially by buying Plex and then selling the Plex, and then by using the ISK you made to buy skill injectors. To an extent, yes, with its limitations, you can just buy skill points now. You can just buy skill points now, except the skill points were trained on an active account.
Yeah, but my argument would be, what if you instead of taking your real money, buying Plex, then buying injectors, what about you take your money, make accounts, and skill? Then it's still naturally created skill points, but at the same time, they only
What's
came
the
out of
need?
money in the first place. So it's the
I mean,
same result at the end.
what's the need? Yeah, exactly. What's the need really when we actually open this up for the skill points to have been naturally created? And look,
I
Shikoku
don't
said
know.
SP farms exist, so CCP is selling straight. So CCP is selling SP anyway. It's I just feel like when this pack arrived, there was the obvious, although it was actually it was less outcry than I was expecting to see. There was the outcry, oh well, so CCP is just selling SP now. I guess that's the end of the game. When really it's just a simplified version of what's been going on for years. I mean, should SP be tradable in any way whatsoever is a completely different question, because that's been here. How long's that been here for? Is that 4 years as well? Maybe longer?
It has been a while. I think it's probably 5 years.
Yeah,
2016 is
could be 5
Citadels,
years.
and I believe SP that was before Citadels, right? So
But
2015.
it's just like if you think back to the start of the game, you had or a little bit after the start of the game, you had people spending money to train dedicated characters for a purpose which they would sell on the character bazaar. You got multiple levels of abstraction between I put money in and I get ISK out or SP out. And then we go to skill injectors, which kind of streamlines that whole process of someone has trained a character to do a thing into I have a character and I take SP that someone else has generated and I put it into my character and I make it the character that I would have bought off the character bazaar. And it, again, as Phantomite has pointed out, that has a very clear pipeline between I put real money in and I get SP of some nature out. And like the only thing that's changed really is that veneer of and that middleman of other players. And frankly, when we moved from character bazaar dominated kind of SP buying, if we're kind of going to call them all SP buying under some umbrella, what happened is that it became much easier to run very large skill point generating operations than it used to be, because before you used to have you used to train an account with a character and then you'd sell that character, so it'd be like a long time paying in,
Took
and
some
then you'd get
knowledge. Took
a
some knowledge
payout.
as to what to
Yeah,
do exactly. What skills are hot? What do people want on a character? What's a waste?
Yeah, I used to do that, by the way, right?
yeah.
I used to train up freighter chars because people thought it takes ages to skill into freighters, and actually it doesn't. It's quite fast. So I sold jump freighters and freighters.
But I mean, but the crucial difference between the character bazaar and the skill injectors, and this is a difference that isn't continued between directly selling SP and skill injectors, is that suddenly the amount of SP available for sale suddenly ballooned, right? Because there's a demand for it, and now there's suddenly a means of scaling that supply to match that demand, rather than before where it was always supply gated. Whereas now, you've got this whole economy of people with large skill farms will buy Plex and multiple pilot training certificates at particular points in the year, and then they'll do a whole effectively economic outlook deciding when they're going to run their skill farms and when they're going to sell the injectors from those skill farms. So I don't really feel that there's been any change in terms of how egregious or not the whole process is. But I think, and maybe Phantomite wanted to touch on this, that there is some hypocrisy in selling SP directly rather than through this player mediated system, because you're then putting your hand directly into the cookie jar rather than by the kind of the intermediary of the player market. When you have things that are so essential that require SP, like CPU management 5 and power grid management 5, that's a third of that 1.5 mil SP to get those 2 to 5, and you can't really fit or fly any combat ship in the game without them. And a similar story for weapon upgrades and advanced weapon upgrades. Now, yes, they've changed it, so it's you only have to go to 4 to weapon upgrades to get advanced weapon upgrades, and then you can go to 4. 4 you're mostly there for everything. Maybe you need a little bit of an assist with an implant or downgrade to a compact somewhere.
Oh, I didn't
But
even know they changed that.
I mean,
but you've got all these skills that are like you just kind of have to have at some point, and it's not like an optional extra.
yeah, I feel that if we're trying to find where the actual problem is, this is perhaps this is perhaps where the problem lies. For years, CCP has been told that these core boring skills that you need. I mean, skills like training, like a frigate skill, you train it, and now you've got something new you can play with. Awesome. Skills like advanced weapon upgrades and things like that are things you need to do to be able to operate these ships properly. They're not fun to train. There's no sort of feeling that you're getting something fresh and new and exciting with everyone. CCP has been told repeatedly that these core skills and the boringness of them is one of the new player experience problems, and CCP has repeatedly acknowledged in public that yeah, I see how this is a problem. So for CCP to understand that that is a problem and to also directly sell skill points generates a huge conflict of interest
Well,
between between CCP getting money and CCP making the new player experience less painful, because
so
as we know with all freemium games that are out there that Eve does have to compete with, they deliberately in those games put problems in that they know people will pay for, and that is where the conflict of interest is with this.
so my big concern is like, where do you draw the line though, right? So you said there's skills that you need to learn and they're not fun to learn. Like, just think back on learning skills. That's the worst example, right?
Yep.
So you had to learn
Yeah.
the learning skills, just not because you wouldn't be able to fly any ship, but you always know everyone else is learning way faster, right? So you learn those first, right? Not
Yeah.
fun. So they removed those. Good step. Now you go to weapon upgrades and advanced weapon upgrades. You're saying, okay, most ships, you probably want to have those at least at level 4, which is correct. But would you put them into the same category and say, okay, remove those skills? And then what about CPU management and power grid management? Do you remove those? Like, where do you
I
stop
can't
then,
give
right?
you
So
the
where's the
answer
line?
to that. I can't give you the answer to how you make those skills, how you make
Fun
the
to
pain
learn.
of those skills go away. I don't think that removing them and essentially in a hidden way giving everybody those skills straight up,
Which is
giving
what they're
people the
kind of
SP back,
doing, right?
it's a difficult problem. But as every year that goes by, it becomes a bigger and bigger problem because it's not being addressed.
So I think I don't
Now
think
that's
you
for the
can
game
fix it.
designers to look at, but they're not because they're still here after being complained about for so long.
But
Can
so
I?
I think what
Sorry.
CCP did, just give me one sec. I think they did exactly that with those skill points, right? They're selling the skill points only to new player. Everyone can buy this package once, right? So every new player can get those 1.5 million SP or whatever, right? And that fills that gap, right? So they kinda in a way removed it, right?
They've removed it by giving you the opportunity to give them money to remove the problem.
Yes, but no matter how you would do it, like if you like, yeah, the middleman is missing kinda, but I don't think it's that much of an issue. I really have to say I don't see that big of a problem with this in this particular case. It always is the whole like, are they opening the fucking Pandora's box with this, right? Like, is this gonna be like, oh, this
They already
works
opened
well, and then
Pandora's box with skill point trading whatsoever. This is just
yes.
an evolution of it. It's here, so there's no point umming and ahhing about how bad it is. This is just a reconfiguration of the same thing.
And Cap, what were you saying?
Oh yeah, I wanted to kind of chip in with a possibly slightly controversial point of view in that I would rather that they'd given everyone the Magic 14 and then left learning skills in, because I think learning skills, yes, they kind of sucked, but what they did do and what was interesting about them is they gave you a way of buying in on an axis of delayed versus immediate gratification, where you could kind of say, okay, well, I'm going to want to train these at some point. That is an absolute given, because it speeds up all of the training for everything else. But deciding when to train them and to what rank was quite interesting, in that you could say, okay, I want to be like combat effective like within the first week. So I'm going to ignore learning skills completely. I'm going to get combat relevant skills so I can get out in a frigate and I can go and have some fun. Or you could say, okay, and maybe more relevant for a second character, you'd be like, right, learning skills first. I want to maximize my SP return. Or, as with probably many of us around the period, where learning skills were present, you'd do the basic ones to 4 really early on. You'd kind of train for a bit. You'd get yourself to like a nice position for like a cruiser, maybe reach into T2 guns a little bit, and then you'd come back and you'd do the advanced ones to 4, and then you'd carry on training a bit more. And then when you were looking down the barrel of skills like Battleship 5 or any of the big skills to get you into things like command ships, then you'd come back and you'd finish them off to get your maximum learning rate. And I thought that was far more interesting than, oh, okay, well, you just can't fit the ship to be competitive unless you've trained the skill to 5.
So, what? One sec, I see your point, and I think you were the first guy ever to make a good point for the learning skills. Right? I'm actually surprised. I'm like, actually, that's a good point. But I think it's only a good point in 2007. Right, where there's not 90% of the player base that you have to catch up to as a new player, right?
Yeah, this is a critique.
Two things. A simple one first is that something that's in the minds of a lot of potential new EVE players about EVE is, well, isn't everybody else like 10 years ahead of me at this point? So what's the point? And to some extent, yeah, even somebody who's played for like 2 years, that looks like a daunting task ahead to try and catch up. And there is some catching up aspect to it. Being able to fly a multitude of ships rather than just 2 frigates for 6 months it is a necessity to be able to enjoy this game. Nobody wants to just fly the same couple of ships for several months unless you're some kind of a self-hating Care Bear who does
seen my sea kill.
And something else about it is another way of looking at it, which is a little bit more painful about things like learning skills, is that essentially the slowness of your training in the future, the things that you've missed out on that everybody else has gained, is sort of a punishment for not having done something boring to begin with. So it's kind of like choose your punishment. Do you want to have an unhappy time now, or do you want to have an unhappy time later?
Yeah,
I don't really like that.
I agree.
So
that's what most people would say.
I've got 2 kind of counterpoints to that. One, I would only propose learning skills exist if the Magic 14 were already given to every character. And I think this has one major benefit, which is that suddenly fitting for ships and modules is absolutely consistent, which I think is something that I see even experienced players get lost in. I have people who will ask me, why doesn't my Doctrine ship fit? And these are people who have been playing a very long time and they have a lot of SP and they just didn't have, shield upgrades 5, and that just makes the fit not
weapon
work.
rigging 5. Something
Yeah,
like
exactly. And so if you suddenly you've come to a place where now all of the ships, I can say this is its power grid value, this is how much a gun is going to cost to fit into it, this is how much a shield extender or a plate or whatever. I think that is a massive experience improvement for new and fairly experienced players alike. And the other kind of counterpoint I would make is that in the era of skill injectors, the opportunity cost of learning skills is nowhere near as brutal as it was, because you can make the plan of, right, I'm going to train fun / combat effective skills and maybe some initial learning skills, and then I'm going to go and make some ISK, I'm going to go and get myself a couple of skill injectors, and I'm just going to inject them. And suddenly you're back up at the top of the curve, but you've had to do a bit of planning. And I think in some ways, being introduced to the brutal reality of you have to plan quite a lot in this game to get anywhere interesting in a very small, condensed way, like learning skills did, was quite instructive. Now, whether they needed to, whether how much SP they took and how long they take to train, whether that was fair, I think is a more nuanced question. But I think that there was a lot of value in inculcating a mindset early into the player experience that if you can capture without, as Phantomite said, kind of creating this punitive experience for being new, I think there's strong value there. So that's how I would propose having that new player, instead of my new player having to train Power Grid 5 and CPU 5, which they do have to just do at some point and they're not very interesting, much like they would have to do learning skills at some point and they're not very interesting. Why not give them all of the skills that put them in the pilot seat faster, and then say, okay, but now you're going to have to think about planning ahead a little bit, and whether you do it by training, whether you do it by earning ISK, you've yeah. I think
Yeah, I would argue that's kind of what they're kind of aiming to do, right? Giving them the skills with the.
I mean, I do think that if you're looking to set an expectation with new players about planning ahead, I think that a very painful truth, even though I like that, I think that a painful truth that we probably have to accept is that the modern gamer doesn't want to play a game that requires that of you, or at least if it does require that of you, that it just slowly leaks that into your head subconsciously rather than presenting you as you start the game with, right, better get ready to plan 3 months ahead, otherwise you're not playing this game. They're
So
just not going to play. They're just not going to play.
I would
okay.
argue it's the current average gamer that doesn't like this. So the EVE player base is getting older. It's way older than the average player base, right? So I would argue maybe when these guys get a little older, maybe EVE would be a little bit more interesting, right? Who knows? I don't think the meta in terms of player like behavior or player or gaming culture or whatever is developed either, right? It takes a while too. So let's see. Like currently, I do believe you're right. Currently, people are all about the next hype game, right? Is it fucking cyberpunk, whatever, right? Or is it what? Like everyone jumps onto those trains, but that might very well end at some point too, and people would be looking for games that say like, yeah, like we made this game, but we're sticking to it and we try to make it work forever, right? So
I might be worried that we're not coming to the end of that era. I might be worried that
it will always be there to a degree.
I'm more worried that the natural evolution of the video game as a product is just always working itself down to it's like a race to the bottom, because that is what makes the human mind light up, is things that are far more basic and instant gratification. And as long as the human mind stays the same, video games are going to be trying to push that same button in the head.
I don't know. I don't know. There's always going to be, to a degree, a lot of people will, especially young people. Right? It's just too easy to get some fun in, like just queue up and shoot some dudes, right? But I think a lot of people can value if there's real value on or like something at stake, which is the case in EVE. I don't know any other game where like something real is at stake. Other than playing real competitive games, right? If you play CS competitively or be it StarCraft or whatever, there's real stakes there, right? That's where you get the shakes too, right?
Well, that's social to a large degree, unless you're playing for money. It's social aspect that's at stake.
In when you play competitive.
Okay, when there's physical goods
Yes.
at stake, that's different. But yeah.
I agree. Like there's something at stake, even if you play competitive without any prize money, right? Your name is on the line, basically, right?
So
you want to make a name
that's
for
a
yourself.
social aspect, isn't it?
Exactly. That's
Really?
I agree.
I suppose you could boil what we do in EVE down to pursuing a social aspect anyway, couldn't you? I want to be better, so everybody looks at me and goes, "Oh, he's the best."
To a degree, that's definitely true. Yeah.
I think one of the things that kind of one of the puzzle pieces in this discussion is, that as a company and in the provision of the game, it is possible for CCP to have an overt recognition that there are people coming to EVE, or as they would to any game, looking for something looking for different things, or looking for things in different amounts. And I think it's been much trotted out, but one of the companies that has done in this aspect a really good job, in both recognizing that players come to their game for different things and almost explicitly categorizing them into different archetypes, and then in their patching and in their content creation, holding each of these archetypes in mind so that each of them feels to some degree served by any major content cycle, is Grinding Gear Games, the company that make Path of Exile. And they have been quite explicit in saying, look, we have people who are super hyper competitive, and what they want is they want a leaderboard, they want to compete, they want their name up in lights as the number one rank of something. And I guess in EVE our equivalent would be like the tournament crowd, right? They really like that high intensity planning and strategizing, and strong focus on individual skill and team execution and communication that the AT is the kind of, in some ways, the pinnacle of, in at least in formalized context, in EVE. And then you have people who really like crafting, so they're looking at adding new features that you can bolt onto armor or weapons or whatever. And in EVE we very much have a same kind of category of people, the builders, who are much maligned as empire builders in current EVE in certain circles. Like they like putting stuff together, they like putting processes in place, infrastructure, pipelines, resources, whatever. They want to have a thing that they can say at the end of the day, I made this is mine and I made it. You've got the people like me who thrive on complex scenario analysis and theory crafting, like fittings and doctrines, and how to execute them, and then that feedback loop where you take it into battle, and it works it works brilliantly, or it falls apart, and you've got that whole cycle where you're like, okay, well, what went wrong, what went right, how do we fix it, how do I make this better, how do I make this more less brittle, because brittle is something that a lot of fleet comps in EVE are. It's one of the reasons I feel that when you get to larger and larger scales, everything just becomes DPS and logi, because any other complexity, you have this brittleness. Like, I don't have a Hugin anymore. My comp no longer works because I can't range control / apply.
It's not
right.
a thing.
End fleet kind of thing, right? And there is a big issue, I think, in the combat ecosystem, that so many doctrines of any interesting complexity are so brittle. Like the evolution of your Stuka doctrine, where you slowly added in things like harpies and retributions for anti-support, and like that was one of the few examples I felt of a doctrine where complexity was sufficiently additive to be worth the extra operational cost in organizing and managing. What else you've got? Like
I love that kind of stuff, by the way.
Yeah, but so the point is that even with the few parallels I've drawn, like there are clearly archetypes of player in EVE that you can kind of reason about what it is that attracts them to the game, and you can design and improve and alter and revamp with them in mind. And I kind of feel that CCP is in some way missing this framework of player categorization, and therefore understanding, like all of the small gang guys who kind of have slowly bled out over the last few years, because there just hasn't been that abundance or even like fairly light levels of availability of small scale content. You can't well, you can now, because the ESS has come in and given them that place to have those small engagements. But
I don't like that a space has been defined for those people.
Yes, okay. This is, I mean, and that's an issue with the PvP abyss, right? But the point is that prior to that, there were very few avenues for players to express that gameplay style, and that was kind of due to the overarching meta and the agglomeration of mainly null groups, because that is where most conflict in the game happens. If you've suddenly gone from, okay, this region has 5 alliances, each of which has somewhere between 50 and 100 players, and this one lives here and that one lives there, and I know that if I go to the boundaries of any of these two, I can probably find someone who's also looking to raid between alliances, or there was much more conflict surface area when there were more smaller alliances, and then as due to the nature of the pressure of N+1, those smaller alliances have teamed up against each other and agglomerated into largely the big blocks we have now today. A lot of that surface area where a roamer could just kind of come in and find something to do went away. So if anything, there TCP has done a really good job of supporting the builders, or at least one flavor of the builders, because there are other kinds of builder, right? And kind of lost track of the other styles along the way. And I feel like until they can get the game reset to a nice point where all styles are well featured, and then maintain that state by keeping each of these kind of archetypes of player in mind in their future content patches, it's going to be a bit yo-yo, and there's going to be like the null crabs are going to be upset and up in arms. And in fairness, why shouldn't they be? Like, the subjective experience of your small small holder, as it were, your newer player in their Ishtar has degraded non-trivially. Or like someone who wants to mine, and then suddenly there's no ore for them to mine anymore. But
Yeah, I agree.
I was just sort of monologuing
there. That's totally fine. Like, I've been monologuing on this like for way too many times. So it's good if someone lets me.
Before just a few hours ago, Cap said to me that he didn't think he had enough to talk about to come on the show.
Well,
but Cap, you doing very good. You know what you're talking about.
Yeah. By the way, so since we're talking about like CCP changes and all that stuff, there's some like Hobo League stuff, right? And I actually took the screenshots.
Actually, I haven't even seen it yet.
So I'm going to put the screenshots.
Cap told me about some of it, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to put the screenshots actually on screen. And I'm, like always, like a little bit of a disclaimer, right? If it's Hobo League stuff, it doesn't mean that's exactly what's coming. But history has shown a lot of times that's exactly what's coming, or like something similar or so, right? So a lot of times it can tell like what they're working on or what they're looking at. So in this case, it looks like another type of storm, which is kind of interesting, right? The storms have been an addition. I don't think they have created any content, but I don't think they've heard either. So I'm not sure if the storms have any kind of influence on anything at the moment. That might just change at some point. I don't know.
I mean, I said when these storms came out that I said why don't these storms affect infrastructure? Why don't I mean, it would be very interesting for a storm to roll in and have effects on the infrastructure of the area. It might be that way a storm could be something that forces a enemy alliance to say, oh, we got to go now, we've got to attack this space now because there's a storm on it. It would be something that could force sort of largely unplanned
with the wind at your back
interaction. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be awesome. But these storms don't do anything to the infrastructure of these places. They do nothing to citadels and gates and things like that. Why didn't they design it so that the storms come in and blow away all of the sparkly things that make Ansiblexes work?
The sparkly things. I don't know. I've not thought about that too much.
That'd be far more interesting. That would do far more to make people,
what,
take opportunities.
Maybe that's coming at some point. Maybe.
Okay, well,
their mindset is now on iterating.
I'm sure it's not NDA breaking for me to tell you what CCP isn't doing.
Then definitely not iterating on storms.
I said this in the lead up to it being made public. Why doesn't it do this? and it's just kind of, well, it does this,
But
and
so,
that's it. Here it is. Great.
but hopefully, so let's assume there's like storms really don't do anything, which is the case at the moment. I feel like I don't want to be too drastic about it. I'm sure someone had some fun
Well,
with a
some of them
storm.
stop you from cloaking.
So just on that, I think the one that stops you from cloaking should shut down Ansiblex. Coming off what you just said, because the no cloaking means you can't cloaky camp, and you can't have all of these sneaky eyes that you would normally have, right? But what you could do is you could give it symmetry by saying, okay, well, but now the defenders can't get there as fast, so you are at more risk as the hunter, but the defender is also at more risk because their support can't arrive as conveniently as it normally does. I
You know
think that
what?
would be a really nice way of balancing that effect, because that is the only effect that people have talked to. I've seen people talking about, and they've just been like, I don't like this one. I'm not going near this. I can't travel through this. It's not safe. I don't like it. And
I
this
mean,
is people who are hunter mindset rather than,
I can come up with a bunch of stuff that would be more interesting, and I'm sure that with some people refining it would be better. Why isn't there a storm effect that shuts down the fluid routers and so makes local not work in the systems? Why isn't there a storm that stops the Ansiblexes from working? Why isn't there a storm that makes all of the asteroids radioactive, so they start doing all a little bit of smart bomb damage, meaning that you can't use drones?
So
So
my hope
Why
is.
isn't there one that obscures your D scan?
So what I wanted to say was actually, so let's assume they don't have any big influence. Like CCP would recognize they haven't been in the game for all that long. And as we already said, like the meta has to develop. Let's see what people can do with it. Now everyone seems to be busy with this war, right? So like maybe that meta development is slowed down even more.
I think
Hopefully
it's a
they
nice
recognize it.
soft launch of the concept, I think, is kind of what you're getting at. Like them not
Yes,
doing a
hopefully.
lot is quite a good way of introducing the player base to them as a concept. And then once you see whether the player base has any significant change in behavior around them, then you start to get a sense of, okay, well, how extreme can we make this effects? And then, I have hope that round 2 of storms will start having more interesting effects, which I think actually segues quite nicely into what this new storm might do, if I have read the Hobolix correctly, which is that they have introduced a new kind of resource called a temporal resource, which is ice. And so my reading of this is that either following on after the storm or while the storm is present, there will be ice to mine.
That sounds interesting.
And
you see, that sounds more interesting. Yeah.
But I think that this ties in much more with what you were saying about making the storms do something, and there has been a lot of speculation about how they might be roped into dynamic resource generation. But I think even beyond that, what I would like people to notice and think about is that this would be the first resource carrot ever since they went down the stick route, because people have been saying, look, the ice belts are not respawning, they're much smaller, and so this might be the start of CCP moving to the, okay, yes, we've started depopulating some of these stocks or some of these constant incomes in terms of what players can access, and now we're going to start moving them over to the new, how we want them to appear in the game from now on.
Yeah, I mean, I've not heard about the new commodity thing, but I think that makes sense, I guess. I wonder if we would see then like a nomadic ice mining camp, They just travel with the storm and just mine ice all day. That would be something new, right?
Well, I mean, but the other thing that makes one speculate in that direction is that they've got ice storm filaments. They have made ice storm filaments.
Yeah, that's
so. Is this going to be the case of, you can do like a nomadic insertion to wherever that storm is, wherever that might take you, and then either try and fight there or try and, because it does have combat changes as you can see on the stream, or do you try and gather resources there and then try and extract them similarly via filaments or by more conventional routes?
I've just had a
I'll bring up the filament thing one sec.
I've just had a thought about this, and because it's Ice Storm. So, disclaimer, I this on Hobo Leaks is the first that I'm learning of this here. I'm wondering, is this just a Christmas event thing?
Oh,
That's the other possibility.
That could actually be true, yeah. You might be right.
But they
Also,
have said that
it is a Christmas. It is a
Sorry,
Christmas
sorry.
event thing because you can see it's the reindeer names again.
It is. It's a Christmas event
Dasher,
thing.
Dancer,
Yes.
Prancer, Vixen, and
So much like filaments were originally only a Christmas thing, these are special. This looks like special Christmas filaments that makes a little bit of a. It makes it a little bit like a Thunderdome. Wherever the storm is, people can yeet themselves into this Christmas Thunderdome of bit of null. I guess that's what this looks like to me in that case.
But it's high-sec filaments too. So high-sec ice storm filament. So is there going to be an ice storm and high-sec that you can filament to?
That's why they have weak and strong. I mean, I guess the other thing, like with their having talked about how they want to use events as a way of testing ideas out in a time-limited format that then might become a more permanent feature. Is this them starting to test, okay, well, what can we do with storms? How will players engage with them if we make them more interesting by giving them a unique resource or a unique abundance of a resource or giving them a unique access method? So I mean, broadly, in terms of the way CCP has been engaging with adapting and adding content to the game, I feel like this year has been quite positive. Not necessarily because I've liked all of the changes they've made, but because I've liked what I understand to be the logic behind how the changes are being introduced. Struggles with the economy outcome aside, because that's always going to be a tough pill to swallow, and there are still certain obvious holes in that I'm hoping that there's going to be a resource inversion at some point, and because to my mind it makes much more sense that the boundaries of unknown space are heavily abundant in low-end materials, and the empires are much more likely to have put themselves near high value abundant deposits because they are harder.
Mega corporations have already got the best stuff.
Exactly. So I would have thought that would make it more sense. There was actually buried in one of the voluminous Reddit threads on this topic, there was a really interesting outline of how one Redditor envisaged the resource distribution, which was effectively as you went from safer to less safe space, the mineral M3 and value per M3 went down, but the M3 abundance went up. So you had small amounts of Zydrine and Megasite in high sec. You had moderate amounts of Noxium and Isogen in low sec, which is kind of what we've got now.
Even the further out you go, the better it rewards organization and cooperation.
Yes, and also that their proposal was that I think bounties only exist in Empire controlled space. So you might either have to haul dog tags back into Empire to get ISK, or indeed there are no bounties for killing pirate factions inside a region that the pirate faction controls that Concord has no interest in, but your remuneration there is in some material instead of in ISK. So there's a kind of a net flow of materials into HiSec, and there's a net flow of ISK out from HiSec to nullsec. But I just thought it was an interesting way of considering how you do regional economy in a more security status based rather than local region based approach.
Yeah, I agree. So there's a third thing. I'm not sure if that has any impact on anything, but there's another implant set that's maybe coming. But I think extra cap recharge. I mean, how impactful can it be for caps? Right?
I mean,
maybe for like the facts.
This potential implant set makes me a little bit bitter, because while an
Even
opinion
more
that
bitter.
a lot of people know I have is even more bitter, even bitterer. As you all know, I've always been of the opinion that, for instance, capital cap boosters are by far the number one biggest problem with the way capital ships have been developed 5 years ago. And I feel that triage was so much more player skill intensive and interesting to fight against when it was recharge based, and this feels like they are just adding a fix on top of a stack of fixes to make the original concept they had work, rather than just going back to what was good, which is a lot simpler. But I mean, sure, yeah, great, but it doesn't solve the problem of capital cap boosters making
And
capital
batteries.
ships essentially immune to subcapital neuting at small and medium scales.
Outside of wormhole space, where you need
Outside of wormhole space with your 5 billion ISK Balgorns.
Yeah, where you have the time. Yeah. In moment space, you're going to get surprised, right? You have the time to actually say, okay, let's nuke this one out for the next 10 minutes, and then, we can see what happens.
So this is kind of just looping back to the idea about player archetypes. This is one of the interesting changes that I think really demonstrated how CCP don't have that kind of thinking in mind, because to consistently execute a 4 capital injector armor triage or a 3 capital injector shield triage for the duration of a wormhole fight is incredibly difficult. And so it is something that people spend hours on the test server and live server practicing, because you are at 0 cap outside of injection. Like, that is the abundance of capacitor warfare on field. You have no cap. So if you want your hardness to run in shield, you have to have immediately fired them after you've injected. So you have to match cycle times. You're fully passive on armor, but I guess the point I'm making is that was like an apex player mechanical skill role that was completely removed when they did the capital cap booster change. Now, I think the capital cap booster change, the way they did it, was terrible. That's partly because I have like an incredibly lengthy ballast document about a different way of achieving what I thought was the same goal. But I think in reality, the problem in sort of subcapital fleets in K space, more in null, I think, in low sec, because obviously the scale and the time duration are a bit different in low sec again. Is that you just don't bring newts in any of your fleets. You don't bring enough newts to actually credibly threaten the capacitor pool of a fax if it's got multiple injectors. Whereas in wormhole space, you assume that there's enough capacitor pressure to completely cripple anything other than a max injector fit. And that capacitor warfare exists regardless of whether there's a fax in the fight or not, because in the lower hull classes like C4 and down, often there isn't a fax in the fight, but you still have 500, 600, 700 plus 100 minus cap a second worth of cap pressure in your fleet, because that's how because the fight is slower, that's how you win. You slowly chew down people's ability to run tackle, to run prop. You slowly get on top of their logi. So I feel like to address the problems of, okay, I have 70 Ferox, I can't kill anything because my opponent has 1 fax and they're reasonably good at using it, without breaking that like apex super bling end, required a solution of significantly more nuance than what was enacted. Because what was enacted, I feel, didn't address the fax power in like the fax war context. I think that was only the stacking rep thing, and I think that did a good job. But yeah, I think you just ruined a section of gameplay, and you still didn't really hit much of the problematic stuff.
And again, I stick by it from a low sec point of view, the way that triage worked previously, which was fully recharge based, and let's not forget, was combat refitting based as well, was far more interesting from both the user and the people attacking it point of view.
I agree, but like I'm not sure if you. I think Phantomite, you know, but I had CCP Rise on like a while ago, and I asked them exactly that. What are the chances that we get combat refitting back?
An exemption when you're in
There's
triage,
no
or
chance.
just when you have one. I mean, I would really like to know. Do you know what? Maybe I'm going to pose the question now. I would really like to know what the specific problems with combat refitting were. Now,
So what he
if he was to
said,
say, as an example, Macariel's being able to refit to do every single long or short range role and various types of refitting their E-war and tank and everything like that, I get it. That sounds terrible, but we destroyed a
so
completely skill-based aspect of the game when that happened.
so
Regarding
the argument he brought up was there is a certain way fitting works in Eve, right? So you have a ship hull, it has so much power grid, so much CPU. You can increase power grid and CPU with mods. You give up slots for it, right? Be it a CPU, whatever, right? But you set out with a set, like you fit it once for the and then you undock, and then you go. So his argument was, or the general argument, I guess, from CCP was that the second you give one hull or one ship type the ability to then suddenly switch the fitting would just lopside the whole setup. And I was a little confused by that argument.
Okay, I don't get it yet. Are you going to tell me that there's a big reveal here as to?
No,
So-
like that was basically it. But so
But it was great. We loved it. We
That's-
loved doing it, and it scaled with player skill rather than just simply scaling with numbers.
That's
Yeah.
that's a much longer conversation. Numbers versus player skill versus yeah. I think there was a way to have your cake and eat it, and that way was to try and build a system where an individual fax gasses out like they do with the one cap booster now, and your ideal scenario was having a small team of them in place of that single super strong one, and having some kind of in and out of triage weaving. Where you would have limited combat refitting because you would be decycling and you would have the combat timer down, but you wouldn't have it as good as it once was, where you could just do it at will. And that was certainly the focus of the proposal that I tried to put together, was that, okay, the fax was very strong. Like, I'm not going to argue about that. I think it was too strong, but the reason it was too strong is because it was too much on one player, on one account. And yes, there was a huge amount of mechanical skill that went into really taking that to its limit, but it's a multiplayer game, and that power should be spread across multiple players.
Which is what weaving triage did.
So you can create a weave with the current facts without combat refitting. It's just
not the
difficult.
same, though. It's not the same, though. With combat refitting, it required that you make choices as to whether you were getting capacitor or resists or a mixture of both. It required that you make that decision and you perform it at the same time. The way that they designed facts after getting rid of combat refitting was, well, they're going to need resists, so give them the resists and also give them the capacitor at the same time by giving them capital cap boosters. That's not been a fair trade for what they used to be.
I mean, in the context of this proposal, I'm talking about the way you address decisions about capacitor boosters versus batteries and regen is you increase the cost of the reps so that you can't inject rep. And so what you do is you set up a system where the triage team, as it would then be, has to decide who's going in and out and when, and whether they are going to include injection, and thus create a lumpiness to their ability to repair, or whether they go for buffer and recharge, like cat pool and recharge only, and then have the vulnerability that if the opposition does bring enough nuke power, your entire system shuts down. So I think you can rebuild a lot of the meaningful choices, but it is quite complicated to do. And yeah, and they didn't.
I don't know how much experience you had with the old triage weaving, but tell you what, it was very complicated to perform as one of the triage pilots, and it really was an opportunity to shine.
I think we should maybe move away from triage, because this could go on a very, very long time.
I also have the feeling like I think we're gonna get stuck in this discussion.
I have to go.
It's not coming back
anyway, so yeah.
we actually already over time anyway.
Okay.
So I would say we just cut it here and leave the carrier discussion or the triage discussion for another day. Maybe. I mean, I've talked about it so many times on this podcast. I can't even, like, capitals in general, the balance is a little bit whatever, right?
I think that a lot of them fell down from. They don't, and actually, this is a more general point. A lot of the, with the addition of lots of new ship classes, a lot of the original niches and roles of different hulls relative to each other have kind of been. Not eroded or even diluted, but kind of like superimposed, so the what each ship does now has more overlap with what other ships do. And capitals are one of the most extreme examples of this, where carrier kind of doesn't really have a strong role, certainly in like big scale capital brawl. Okay, yes, space superiority fighters, but like if you can't deploy fighters, they're useless. Like, there is no capital E-war platform or dedicated E-war platform. And then you look at Titans, and you're just like, CCP gave a ship almost everything they could think of, and then it turned out to be a little bit nuts when someone put several hundred of them on the same grid. And they've focused like super carriers up a bit more, but I think there's a lot of vagueness still in how all of them fit together.
Definitely bring back some capital purpose by letting them shoot citadels without the citadels papping them off the grid.
Yeah, well, you know what? Capitals and citadels, like, it's an endless discussion. I think, like, we could talk about that for like 5 hours straight and not come to the perfect solution. And I wanna end it also saying it's not easy, right? We're talking about changes. It's not easy to hit the nail on the head, right? So yes, CCP has made mistakes, but they made like some really good changes recently. So I'm hopeful they will look at those big things too, and they're looking at that. I know they're looking at citadels. I know they're looking at capitals, but they need to be careful too, right? So hopefully, we're gonna see some changes to both of those in the next year, and like, I think nobody here wants to like shit on CCP just because they made some mistakes in some areas. So
a lot of the problems with citadels are very complicated in terms of scale, very complicated in terms of how do you juggle different time zones against each other. That's probably the hardest problem.
Every playstyle
of citadels. Yeah, exactly. They're there. They're always there somewhere, or something that fulfills their function is. And I think capitals, the hardest part is that they were kind of left where they were for so long. Not so much that they were in a hugely problematic position, or that they can't be put in a much better position, but it's just that the status quo in some ways has become so entrenched that it's going to be really difficult to move them to a better place without making that feel really bad for people who have them along the way. I think that's the thing that I would say about about some of their the positions where they have made mistakes. They're not they can go somewhere better, but yeah, sorry.
That's all good. Alrighty, guys. I would say let's cut it right here then. Thanks both of you for showing up. And we should totally do that again, because obviously we don't have a problem finding topics to talk about. Because I literally didn't write down more than five lines, which is we should be talking about, and I think we talked about 3 of them. So I enjoyed it very much. Thanks you guys for coming on. I hope the guys on stream enjoyed it. And I would say see you guys on the next one.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Oh, and the guys on for everyone who watches videos and stuff like this, I had to delete all my highlights from Twitch. The whole DMCA thing is going on, right? So I played the careful road and said better delete everything. But I'm re-uploading them all to YouTube as a little bit of an archive thing. And I decided, instead of dumping 70 videos all at once onto YouTube, I'm just gonna add them all one day at a time. So every day from today on, every day there's gonna be one of the old highlights coming up. So for those who are curious and want to see those, there's some good old Stuka footage, some small scale stuff, all kinds of shit in there. So for those who are interested in that, check it out. And see you guys around. Let's see who we can host. All right, let's have a look. There is a Mr. 3 Tiers on. Or Rose. I've never hosted him, I believe. Let's do it. So guys, oops, typo. Here we go. See you guys on the other side.